My husband abandoned me in the delivery room and disappeared for hours. Now I'm questioning if I can ever trust him again. This happened 2 months ago, but it's still causing major friction in my family. So I need some outside opinions. I, 29F, and my husband, Jake, 32M, have been together for 6 years, married for 3. We were both ecstatic when we found out we were expecting our first child. Pregnancy was tough for me, though. I had severe morning sickness, gestational diabetes, and was generally miserable. But Jake was supportive and sweet the whole way through, which made it bearable. As we got closer to my due date, we discussed birth plans. I was adamant that I wanted Jake in the delivery room. I needed his support, and he'd always agreed. However, a few weeks before my due date, Jake started acting strange. He was distant, distracted, and wouldn't engage in any baby-related discussions. I thought he was just anxious about becoming a dad, so I didn't press him too much. The day I went into labor, Jake drove me to the hospital but seemed off. He was quiet and kept checking his phone. When we got there, he pulled the nurse aside and spoke to her privately. She came back and told me Jake wouldn't be in the delivery room because he was uncomfortable with blood and medical procedures. I was stunned. He'd never mentioned this before. I begged him to stay. Told him I needed him, but he just kept saying, "I can't do this." I was heartbroken and furious, but I didn't have much time to dwell on it as my contractions were getting stronger. Jake said he'd be in the waiting room and kissed me on the forehead before leaving. I was left alone, crying and feeling utterly abandoned. Labor was long, painful, and traumatic. I was alone the entire time except for the medical staff. When our son was finally born, I was exhausted, emotionally and physically. The nurse handed me my son, and all I felt was a deep sadness that Jake wasn't there to share this moment. After I was taken to a recovery room, I asked the nurse to get Jake. She came back and said he'd left the hospital hours ago. I couldn't believe it. I called him repeatedly, but he didn't answer. Finally, I sent him a text saying I was done and he could find his own way home. I didn't see him until the next day. He showed up at the hospital with flowers and an apology, saying he'd panicked and needed some air. He claimed he'd gone home to shower and change and fell asleep, which I didn't buy for a second. I told him I didn't believe him. I was overwhelmed with anger and hurt, and I told him he had let me down in the worst possible way. He kept apologizing, saying he knew he'd messed up and he'd do anything to make it right. I didn't want him near me or our son at that moment, so I asked him to leave. He tried to protest, but I told him I needed time to process everything. He left, and I spent the rest of my hospital stay alone with my baby, trying to grapple with the enormity of what had happened. Since then, Jake has been trying to make amends. He's been taking parenting classes, attending therapy, and is constantly trying to be present and supportive. But I can't shake the feeling of betrayal. He abandoned me at one of the most vulnerable moments of my life. Every time I look at him, I remember being alone in that delivery room, terrified and in pain, wondering why the person who promised to be by my side wasn't there. My family is split. Some think I'm being too hard on Jake, that he made a mistake and is clearly remorseful. They say he's a good father and partner otherwise, and I should focus on moving forward for the sake of our child. Others think what he did was unforgivable and I should leave him. They believe I'll never truly trust him again, and that's no foundation for a marriage. I'm torn. I do still love him, and I know he loves me and our son. But part of me wonders if I'll ever get over this. Was it just a moment of weakness on his part, or a sign of something deeper that I can't overlook? So, Ida for leaving him at the hospital and now considering leaving him for good? Update 1. Update 1. I wasn't expecting this post to blow up like it did, and I appreciate all the feedback I've received. It's been a few weeks since I posted, and things have been complicated, to say the least. I read through every comment and talked to a few close friends about what happened. The overwhelming consensus was that I deserved better support during such a vulnerable moment. I couldn't argue with that. I felt abandoned, and that's hard to shake. Jake and I had a serious conversation after my initial post. I told him how deeply his actions had affected me. I explained, in painful detail, what it felt like to be alone in that delivery room. I told him I wasn't sure if I could ever move past the betrayal. He was quiet for a long time and eventually admitted something that shocked me. He wasn't just panicking about the birth itself. He confessed that he'd been feeling disconnected from the pregnancy for months. Apparently, he wasn't sure if he was ready to be a father at all. That revelation was like a gut punch. Here I was, carrying our child, dealing with all the physical and emotional challenges of pregnancy, and he hadn't even been fully on board with becoming a dad. It explained a lot of his distant behavior, but it didn't make it hurt any less. I asked him why he hadn't told me any of this sooner. He said he didn't want to stress me out during the pregnancy and hoped he'd get over it once the baby was born. But when the time came and I was in labor, he realized he couldn't handle the reality of it. He said the pressure of becoming a parent hit him all at once and he panicked. That's why he left the hospital. Hearing all of this made me feel even more betrayed. I had been carrying the weight of our pregnancy alone while he was quietly wrestling with his doubts. And instead of coming to me with his fears, he chose to leave me at the most critical moment. It wasn't just about being squeamish over blood. It was about him not being emotionally ready for fatherhood. We both cried during that conversation. He kept saying he was sorry, that he was ashamed of himself, and that he wanted to be the father our son deserved. But I was left wondering if he was too late. How could I trust someone who hadn't even been honest with me about something so important? Since that conversation, Jake has been doing everything he can to show that he's committed to our family. He's been going to therapy twice a week, attending every parenting class, and he's been a lot more hands-on with our son. I can see that he's trying, and part of me wants to believe that he's sincere in wanting to make things right. But I'm still struggling. My trust in him has been shattered, and I don't know if I can rebuild it. Every time I think about how vulnerable I was in that delivery room, how much I needed him and how alone I felt, the anger rises up all over again. For now, we're still living together, but things are tense. We've agreed to go to couples therapy, and I'm hoping that will help us figure out whether this marriage can be saved. But I'm also preparing myself for the possibility that it might not be. My family is still divided on the issue. My mom and sister think I should leave him, that I deserve someone who will be there for me unconditionally. My dad, on the other hand, believes that Jake made a mistake, but that he's trying to fix it, and I should give him another chance. I'm torn between these two perspectives, and honestly, I don't know what to do. So that at the end of the day, I have to think about what's best for me and my son. And right now, I'm not sure what that looks like. Update 2. It's been another month since my last update, and I can't believe how much has changed in such a short time. After weeks of therapy and many long conversations, I thought Jake and I were starting to make progress. He's been working so hard to rebuild my trust, and for a while, it seemed like we might actually be able to move forward. But then something happened that threw everything into chaos. A few days ago, I got a message from a woman I didn't recognize on Facebook. She said she had something important to tell me about Jake, and my heart immediately sank. I hesitated before opening it, but my gut told me I needed to see what she had to say. The message was long, and as I read it, my hands started shaking. She claimed that she and Jake had been involved in an emotional affair for the past 6 months. She said they met at a work conference, and it started out as just friendly conversations, but over time, they got closer. According to her, nothing physical had happened, but they had been texting and talking on the phone regularly, confiding in each other about their lives. She said Jake had confided in her about his fears of becoming a father, and that he had told her about leaving me at the hospital. She said she felt guilty for being his emotional support while I was dealing with the pregnancy and birth, and that's why she decided to come clean to me. I felt like my world was crumbling. All the progress I thought Jake and I had made felt like a lie. I confronted him that night, and at first, he denied everything. But when I showed him the messages, he broke down and admitted it was true. He swore up and down that it was never physical, that it was just someone he talked to when he was feeling overwhelmed, and that it didn't mean anything. But to me, it meant everything. I told him I was done. I can't keep making excuses for him or hoping he'll change. The betrayal runs too deep, and I can't stay in a marriage where I'm constantly questioning his loyalty. He begged me not to leave, said he'd cut off all contact with her and continue therapy. but I don't think I can ever trust him again. I've started looking for a lawyer to discuss my options. I never wanted to be a single mom, but I also don't want to stay in a marriage where I feel so disrespected and hurt. My priority now is my son, and I want to make sure I'm in a healthy place for him, even if that means doing it on my own. I'm heartbroken, but I know this is the right decision for me. Thank you to everyone who has been supportive and kind throughout this ordeal. I never imagined things would turn out like this, but I have to believe that walking away is the first step toward healing. Update 3. I'm writing this final update after what has been the most difficult decision of my life. I've officially filed for divorce from Jake. It's been a whirlwind of emotions, but I know in my heart that it's the right thing to do. After discovering his emotional affair, I realized that there was no coming back from this. It's been hard explaining everything to my family and friends. My mom and sister have been incredibly supportive, reminding me that I deserve to be with someone who will prioritize me and our son. My dad, though, still thinks I'm being too harsh. He says that Jake is clearly remorseful and that I should give him one more chance, but I just can't. Since filing, Jake has been a mess. He's begging for forgiveness, showing up at my parents' house unannounced, sending long texts about how much he loves me and how he'll do anything to fix things. But I'm standing firm. I told him that I need space and that he needs to respect my decision. I've also been preparing for life as a single mom. It's scary, and I'm not going to lie. There are moments when I doubt myself. But I know that staying in an unhealthy marriage would be worse for both me and my son. We deserve peace, stability, and happiness, even if it's just the two of us for now. There have been some bright spots in all of this, though. My friends have rallied around me, offering support, babysitting, and even helping me look for a new place to live. I've also reconnected with myself in a way I haven't felt in a long time. It's like I've finally taken control of my life again. And while it's bittersweet, it's also empowering. As for Jake, I wish him well. I really do. I hope he continues with therapy and becomes a better person for our son's sake. But I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my own well-being to save a marriage that, at its core, was built on broken trust. Thank you to everyone who followed my story and offered advice. It's been a long, painful journey, but I finally feel like I'm moving in the right direction. Here's to new beginnings.